In his first 3 NBA seasons, Michael Jordan averaged 31.7 points, 5.6 rebounds, and 5 assists per game. He made the playoffs every single year. He was named Rookie of the Year, voted an All-Star starter 3 times, became the second player since Wilt Chamberlain to crack 3,000 points in a season, and became the first player in league history to record 200 steals and 100 blocks in the same campaign. And still the consensus around the NBA was that he would never win. That is the answer to the question this video asks. When people call Jordan's early years the era when he was just a scorer, they are telling you more about how the league failed to see what was standing right in front of it than about any limitation in Jordan's game. The scoring was volcanic, yes. It was unprecedented. It was the kind of offensive production the league had not seen since Chamberlain wore short shorts and scored 50 a night in a different century of basketball. But underneath that avalanche of points, Jordan was already building the defensive instincts, the competitive architecture, and the psychological engine that would eventually destroy every team foolish enough to stand in his path. The narrative was simple. Jordan shoots, Jordan scores, Jordan loses. The reality was far more complicated and far more revealing. Because what happened in those first 3 seasons was not a one-dimensional scorer failing to elevate his team. It was a transcendent talent being buried alive by a franchise that surrounded him with journeymen, part-time players, and teammates who would eventually end up in drug rehabilitation programs. The story of just a scorer is not Jordan's story. It is the story of everyone else's failure to see the whole picture. Let's go back to the beginning and see what they missed. The Chicago Bulls that Jordan joined in October of 1984 were not merely bad, they were catastrophically bad. The season before his arrival, the franchise had gone 27-55, posting the worst record in the Eastern Conference by point differential. Their roster was a jumble of aging contracts and volatile personalities. Orlando Woolridge was a legitimate scorer. He would average nearly 23 points per game alongside Jordan as a rookie, but he was inconsistent and would later enter drug rehabilitation. Quentin Daly, the team's starting shooting guard before Jordan displaced him, had off-court issues that shadowed his career and would eventually derail it entirely. Dave Corzine, the 7-foot center nicknamed the Lumberjack, was a workmanlike player who gave honest effort but was nobody's idea of a franchise cornerstone. Ennis Watley ran the point. Caldwell Jones anchored the middle at 34 years old. Steve Johnson provided interior scoring but little else. This was the supporting cast. This was what the 3rd overall pick in the 1984 draft walked into, and it was not an accident. General manager Rod Thorne, the man who drafted Jordan, was honest about the state of the franchise at the time. He wanted a center. Houston had already taken Hakeem Olajuwon first. Portland took Sam Bowie second. Thorne settled for Jordan with the tone of a man accepting a consolation prize. When the pick was announced, Thorne's public statement was famously lukewarm. He acknowledged Jordan's talent, but expressed concern that the team needed a big man, not a guard. The enthusiasm was muted. The expectations were modest. Jordan did not care about modest expectations. 3 games into his career, on October 29, 1984, he dropped 37 points on the Milwaukee Bucks. Within 7 games, he had already scorched the New York Knicks for 33 points at Madison Square Garden, shooting 15 of 22 from the field, with 8 rebounds and 5 assists in 33 minutes. By December, he was putting up 45-point games against Cleveland with 11 assists mixed in. By February, he was dropping 49 on the Detroit Pistons. And the Bulls? They finished 38-44. They made the playoffs as the 7th seed, a meaningful improvement from the franchise's recent history of missing the postseason entirely, but hardly a seismic shift. Jordan had dragged a 27-win team to 38 victories, an 11-game improvement. For context, that year the Bulls improved from the worst record in the conference to the playoffs. Jordan was the entire reason. But the narrative machine was already spinning. Jordan scores, but does he win? Here is what gets lost in the mythology of Jordan's rookie season. The scoring was actually the least interesting thing about it. He averaged 28.2 points. Yes, 3rd in the entire league behind Bernard King and Larry Bird. But he also averaged 6.5 rebounds and 5.9 assists for a shooting guard. On a team with no playmaker, no secondary creator, and no offensive system designed to maximize his gifts, think about that assists number, 5.9 per game. As a rookie, In an era when shooting guards were not asked to create for others the way point guards were, Jordan was functioning as Chicago's primary distributor out of necessity. The Bulls did not have a point guard who could set up teammates, so the supposed one-dimensional scorer was doing it himself, scoring, rebounding, passing, creating, because no one else on the roster could. His defensive numbers were equally telling, even if nobody was paying attention. Jordan recorded 2.4 steals per game as a rookie, which placed him among the league leaders. He was already displaying the anticipation, the quick hands, and the gambling instincts that would later define his defensive reputation. But in 1985, nobody cared about a rookie's steals. They cared about the dunks. And then came All-Star Weekend. The 1985 All-Star Game in Indianapolis was supposed to be Jordan's coronation. He had been voted in as a starter by the fans, a rookie, starting in the All-Star Game, ahead of established veterans who had been building their reputations for years. That did not sit well with everyone. According to Dr. Charles Tucker, who served as an advisor to both Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas, the veteran players decided to make a point. The guys weren't happy with his attitude up here. Tucker later said, they decided to teach him a lesson. On defense, Magic and George gave him a hard time, and offensively, they just didn't give him the ball. Jordan finished the game with just 7 points on 9 shot attempts. Whether it was a deliberate freeze-out or simply a rookie getting fewer touches in an all-star setting has been debated for decades. Thomas himself has denied it repeatedly, once telling reporter Peter Vesey, him thinking he was froze out is bulls. He and I were not at the level that we could talk to Bird, McHale, Moses, Dr. J, Sidney Moncrief. We were way down. Jordan, for his part, later acknowledged his own naivety. I didn't really know. I was too immature at the time to even realize it was happening. But whether the freeze-out was real or imagined, its psychological effect was undeniable. Jordan returned from that All-Star break and scorched the league. On February 12, 1985, 3 days after the All-Star Game, Jordan dropped 49 points on Isaiah Thomas and the Detroit Pistons. That was not a coincidence. Years later, during his Hall of Fame induction speech, Jordan brought it up directly. He thanked Thomas, Johnson, and George Gervin by name. You guys gave me the motivation to say, you know what, evidently I haven't proved enough to these guys. I gotta prove to them that I deserve what I've gotten on this level. The just a scorer label began as a weapon others used against Jordan. He turned it into fuel. Everything changed 3 games into the 1985-86 season. On October 29th, exactly 1 year after his 37-point eruption against Milwaukee, Jordan broke his left foot against the Golden State Warriors. He had started the season 3-0, looking even more dominant than he had as a rookie. Then the foot cracked, and everything stopped. Jordan played just 18 games that entire season. The Bulls cratered to 30-52, their worst record since before his arrival. New owner Jerry Reinsdorf and new general manager Jerry Krause wanted Jordan to sit out the entire year. The team was terrible regardless. Why risk a career-ending injury on a lost season? From a business perspective, the math was simple. Protect the asset. Jordan was already the most marketable player in basketball. His Nike deal, signed before he had played a single professional game, had generated $126 million in Air Jordan sales in its first year alone, obliterating Nike's projection of $3 million by the 4th year. He was worth more sitting in street clothes than any other player on the roster was worth in uniform. But Jordan was not an asset. He was a competitor, and he was miserable. When I heard it was cracked, that really hurt me, he said in 1985. What do I do from here? 6 weeks of nothing? All I could think of was I would lay up, watch TV, and do nothing. I don't feel too well. I've never gone through anything like this before, and I don't know how to deal with it. Right now, I can cry all night and wake up tomorrow and find out what it's all about. What Jordan did next revealed something about his character that pure scoring numbers never could. He snuck back to the University of North Carolina to rehabilitate and play 5-on-5 pickup games without the Bulls' knowledge. The Bulls never knew I was doing it, he later admitted. He was testing his foot, pushing himself, refusing to accept the front office's timeline. When he was ready to return in March, the organization tried to restrict his minutes. Jordan fought them on it. He wanted to play. He wanted to compete. He wanted to be on the court for the playoffs, no matter what the Bulls' record looked like. This was the moment that should have killed the just a scorer narrative permanently. A player focused solely on individual numbers would have welcomed the chance to sit out, protect his body, and come back fresh for a season where the team might actually have a chance. Jordan demanded the opposite. He fought his own franchise for the right to play on a 30-win team because he could not bear to watch from the sideline. The Bulls limped into the playoffs as the 8th seed, one of the worst teams to ever qualify for the postseason, and drew the 67-15 Boston Celtics in the first round. That Celtics team had 5 future Hall of Famers. Larry Bird had just won his 3rd consecutive MVP. They had gone 40-1 at home. They were, by most accounts, one of the greatest teams ever assembled. Jordan did not care. In Game 1 of the 1986 Eastern Conference first round, Jordan played 43 minutes against a Boston team that had been resting its starters for weeks in preparation for the playoffs. He was just months removed from a broken foot. He scored 49 points. The Bulls lost 123-104. It was not close. Then came Game 2, April 20th, 1986, Boston Garden. Between games, Jordan had played golf with Celtics guard Danny Ainge and lost. "I took a few bucks off of Michael that day, and we're talking trash to each other," Ainge later recalled. That might have been a mistake. Mark Vansel, who was riding in the car with Jordan afterward, remembered the moment Jordan dropped Ainge off. Michael says, "Hey, tell your boy DJ, I got something for him tomorrow." What followed was not merely a basketball game. It was a declaration of war against the concept of human limitation. Jordan scores 13 in the first quarter, staking the Bulls to an 8-point lead against the best team in basketball. The Celtics claw back through the second and third quarters, outscoring Chicago by 5, but Jordan keeps firing 10 points in the second, 8 in the third. Then comes the fourth quarter, and Jordan detonates. 23 points in a single period against a defense anchored by Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and Dennis Johnson. The game goes to overtime. Jordan hits free throws to force a second overtime. In 53 minutes of playing time, he makes 22 of 41 shots from the field and 19 of 21 from the free throw line. 63 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks, the most points ever scored in an NBA playoff game, a record that still stands 4 decades later. The Bulls lost 135-131. Boston swept the series in 3 games. And after the game, Larry Bird sat down with reporters and delivered a verdict that echoed through basketball history. He called Jordan's performance one of the most extraordinary individual displays he had ever witnessed, saying the performance transcended anything he had seen on a basketball court. Bill Walton, the Celtics reserve center and a champion himself, remembered the locker room afterward. "We said, 'This guy's pretty good.' Jordan, true to form, was not interested in the compliment. 'I'm not worried about the points,' he said. He wanted the win. He wanted the series." The 63 meant nothing to him without advancement. This was the paradox that confused everyone watching. The man they called just a scorer was utterly indifferent to his own scoring record. He wanted to beat the Celtics, not impress them. But the label persisted, because the Bulls lost, because the team was overmatched, because individual brilliance, no matter how staggering, could not compensate for the talent gap between a 30-win team and one of the greatest rosters in league history. If the 63-point game was the announcement, the 1986-87 season was the full symphony. Jordan came back from the broken foot with something to prove to everyone, to the front office that tried to keep him off the court, to the Celtics who swept him, to the voters who had given Magic Johnson the MVP, to the coaches who would not put him on an all-defensive team. The numbers he produced that season belong in a museum. 37.1 points per game, 3,041 total points. The second player since Wilt Chamberlain in 1963 to eclipse the 3,000-point barrier in a single season. 37 games of 40 or more points, 8 games of 50 or more. A streak of 9 consecutive games scoring 40 or more during late November and early December, 6 of them coming during a West Coast road trip where he carved through the league's best teams like a blowtorch through cardboard. On February 26th, he hung 58 on the New Jersey Nets, including a record 26 of 27 from the free throw line. On March 4th, he dropped 61 on the Detroit Pistons. On April 16th, he matched it 61 against the Atlanta Hawks and set an NBA record by scoring 23 consecutive points in a single game. The scoring was historic. But here's the part the just a scorer critics conveniently ignore. Jordan also averaged 5.2 rebounds and 4.6 assists that season. He posted 2.9 steals per game and 1.5 blocks. He became the first player in NBA history to record more than 200 steals and 100 blocks in the same season. Not just for a guard, for any player at any position in the history of the league. Read that again. A 6'6" shooting guard was blocking more shots than most power forwards while simultaneously picking more pockets than any point guard. And the defensive coaches around the league still left him off the all-defensive teams entirely. Jordan was incensed. He took it as a personal affront. When Michael Cooper of the Los Angeles Lakers won Defensive Player of the Year that season, receiving 25 of 78 votes, while Jordan got exactly 1, the competitive furnace inside Jordan's chest reached temperatures that would reshape the entire league. Michael Cooper is great at ball denial, Jordan told Sports Illustrated that year. Barely containing his contempt, he was already planning his revenge. The next season, 1987-88, he would win both the scoring title and the Defensive Player of the Year award, the only player in history to do so. But that is a story for another video. The seeds of that dominance were planted right here, in the 1986-87 season, when a 23-year-old scored 37 a night and was told it wasn't enough. To understand why Jordan's early teams failed, you have to understand what he was working with, and the picture is bleak. The Bulls who surrounded Jordan in those first 3 seasons were not just mediocre, they were unstable. Sam Smith, the longtime Chicago Tribune reporter who covered those Bulls from day one, later described the culture. 2 of his teammates, Quinton Daly and Orlando Woolridge, would eventually go into drug rehabilitation, and others, like Steve Johnson, Jawan Oldham, Sidney Green, and Ennis Watley, would fade into lesser roles. Woolridge was the closest thing Jordan had to a co-star. He averaged 22.9 points per game in Jordan's rookie year, legitimate scoring production from a 6'9" forward with elite athleticism and a devastating alley-oop game. But Woolridge was inconsistent, and after 2 seasons alongside Jordan, he was gone. Daly, the man Jordan replaced in the starting lineup, averaged 16 points off the bench and finished 6th in 6th Man of the Year voting during Jordan's rookie campaign. Former teammate Dave Corzine later said Daly held his own against Jordan in practice. And in his book, Driven from Within, Jordan acknowledged the tension. He could never be close friends with Woolridge and Daly because he had stolen their spotlight. But Daly's career was already unraveling. He struggled with substance abuse and would leave Chicago after the 1985-86 season, never again reaching his earlier level. The coaching was equally chaotic. Kevin Lawfrey, the head coach during Jordan's rookie year, was replaced by Stan Albeck for the broken foot season, who was himself replaced by Doug Collins for Jordan's 3rd year. 3 head coaches in 3 seasons. No continuity, no system, no philosophy, beyond give the ball to Michael and get out of the way. And what about the 2nd and 3rd scoring options on those teams? In Jordan's 3rd season, the 1986-87 campaign, when he averaged 37 a night, Charles Oakley was the only other Bull to average double-figure scoring with 14.5 points and 13.1 rebounds. As one anonymous Celtics player put it, surveying the rest of the Chicago roster, Michael's their only Division I prospect. That, quote, cruel, dismissive, and painfully accurate tells you everything about why the just a scorer label was so unfair. Jordan was not just a scorer. He was the scorer, the creator, the defender, and often the rebounder on a team that had nobody else capable of performing those functions at an NBA level. He did not score 37 a night because he was selfish. He scored 37 a night because if he didn't, the Bulls might not score at all. Let's put the just a scorer argument under a microscope and see if it survives. In his first 3 NBA seasons, Jordan's team went from 27 wins the year before his arrival to 38, then 30, with Jordan missing 64 games to injury, then 40. In the 2 seasons he was healthy and played all 82 games, the Bulls improved by a combined 24 wins over their pre-Jordan baseline. He dragged that franchise to the playoffs 3 straight years after they had missed the postseason entirely the season before he arrived. His playoff averages across those 3 postseasons were staggering: 35.5 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 6.9 assists per game. Nearly a triple-double average in the playoffs. In the 2 series against Boston, the greatest team in the East, Jordan averaged over 43 points per game across 5 contests. He did not shrink on the biggest stage, he expanded. And the assists. This is the statistic that demolishes the selfish scorer narrative most thoroughly. Jordan averaged 5.9 assists as a rookie, 4 assists in his injury-shortened second year, and 4.6 in his third season. For comparison, the average shooting guard in the mid-'80s averaged roughly 3 assists per game. Jordan was creating for teammates at a rate almost double his positional average, and those teammates were converting at a lower rate than teammates on most other playoff-caliber rosters. If he had been surrounded by even average shooters, his assist numbers would have been substantially higher. His efficiency, too, was remarkable. He shot 51.5% from the field as a rookie, and 48.2% in his third year while carrying the highest scoring load in a quarter century. Most high-volume scorers sacrifice efficiency for volume. Jordan maintained both. He was not chucking contested jumpers and hoping for the best. He was dissecting defenses, finding the right shot, and making it at an elite clip while shouldering a burden no other player in the league was asked to carry. The argument that Jordan was just a scorer required you to ignore the rebounds, the assists, the steals, the blocks, the efficiency, the team improvement, and the playoff performance. It required you to look at a player doing everything and see only the one thing he did most visibly. It was, in retrospect, one of the great analytical failures in the history of sports commentary. The just a scorer narrative was not a fringe opinion. It was mainstream. It was conventional wisdom, repeated by coaches, executives, and journalists who should have known better. Sam Smith, who would go on to write the Jordan Rules and become the foremost chronicler of the Jordan-era Bulls, was honest about his own complicity. They weren't winning yet, Smith recalled. We didn't know if they were going to. The notion around the NBA was, you can't win with Jordan. He's too selfish a scorer. He'll be like George Gervin, a great scorer who's never going to win. Or a better player like Julius Erving, who was a big star and did all the dunking, but he didn't win until he got Moses Malone. That comparison, Jordan to Gervin, Jordan to Erving, was the framework the league used to understand him. High-flying wing scorers were entertainment. They sold tickets. They made highlight reels. But they did not win championships. Championships were for point guards who controlled tempo and big men who controlled the paint. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Moses Malone. That was the championship mold, and Jordan did not fit it. Even Jordan's future teammates saw it this way. Scottie Pippen, who arrived in Chicago in 1987 and would eventually become Jordan's most important partner, later offered a blunt assessment of the pre-Pippen Bulls. I've seen Michael Jordan play before I came to play with the Bulls. You guys have seen him play. He was a horrible player. He was horrible to play with. It was all one-on-one, shooting bad shots. Pippen added, he was a player that really, winning wasn't at the top of his category. It was scoring. He was going after scoring titles. Pippen's words, spoken decades later, after their relationship had fractured, are revealing less for their accuracy than for their perspective. Even the man who would share 6 championship stages with Jordan absorbed the narrative. Even Pippen, who watched Jordan up close for 15 years, could look back at those early seasons and see just a scorer instead of a transcendent player with no help. Jordan himself understood the criticism and, characteristically, turned it into motivation. I'm taking these raps as a challenge, just to get better and see that my team gets better, he said during his third season. But it's not as if I'm playing with a bunch of all-leaguers. What are the factors here? Are you telling me Kareem and James wouldn't be all-stars without Magic? That single quote might be the most analytically precise thing anyone said about those early Bulls. Jordan was not failing to elevate his teammates. His teammates were simply not elevatable. You cannot pass the ball to a player who cannot catch it. You cannot create open shots for a roster that cannot make them. The limitation was not in Jordan's game. It was in the talent surrounding him. Here's what makes the just a scorer era so fascinating in retrospect. Jordan was already showing you everything. Every skill, every instinct, every competitive trait that would eventually produce 6 championships and 5 MVPs was already visible in those first 3 seasons. You just had to look past the scoring totals to see it. The defense was there from day one. 2.4 steals per game as a rookie, 2.9 steals and 1.5 blocks in his third year. The historic 200 steal, 100 block season that nobody rewarded with an all-defensive selection. Jordan was not merely a competent defender who happened to score a lot of points. He was an elite disruptive force on the ball, with the length, the quickness, and the anticipation to shut down opposing guards while also roaming into passing lanes and challenging shots at the rim. When he was finally given defensive recognition, the Defensive Player of the Year award in 1988, his fourth season, it felt less like an achievement and more like a belated correction. The leadership was there too, even if it manifested in ways that made people uncomfortable. Jordan held teammates accountable, with a ferocity that bordered on cruelty. He challenged them in practice. He demanded effort. He was not interested in being liked. This was not a popular approach in the mid-'80s, when the culture around professional basketball valued getting along over pushing each other to uncomfortable places. But it was the approach that would eventually transform a franchise. The clutch gene was there. The willingness to take and make the biggest shots in the biggest moments was evident from his first college game, the 1982 national championship winner against Georgetown, and it carried seamlessly into the professional ranks. Jordan did not shrink in the fourth quarter. He expanded. His scoring numbers in the final periods of close games during those early seasons were disproportionately high, a statistical fingerprint of a player who wanted the ball when the stakes were highest. And the basketball IQ was there, hidden beneath the scoring volume. Jordan's ability to read defenses, find the open man, and make the right play was already advanced by his third season. The 4.6 assists per game does not capture the hockey assists, the gravity he created by demanding double teams, or the defensive rotations he forced, simply by standing on the court. He was making his teammates better in ways the box score could not quantify, even as the box score told a story of individual dominance. The real transformation that turned Jordan from a championship-less scorer into a six-time champion was not a change in his game, it was a change in his circumstances. Jerry Krause drafted Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant in 1987. Doug Collins installed a more structured offense. Phil Jackson arrived in 1989 and brought the triangle system that would finally distribute the scoring burden away from Jordan's shoulders. The supporting cast improved. The coaching improved. The system improved. Jordan did not become a different player. The franchise finally became worthy of the player it already had. Here is the truth about Michael Jordan's first 3 NBA seasons, stated plainly and without qualification. There was no era when Michael Jordan was just anything. The phrase itself is an insult disguised as analysis, a failure of imagination masquerading as expert opinion. From the moment he stepped onto the court in October of 1984, 16 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, and a debut that barely hinted at what was coming. Jordan was the most complete player in professional basketball. He scored because scoring was required. He defended because defending was in his nature. He passed because he could see the floor. He rebounded because he refused to be outworked. And he lost not because of any deficiency in his game, but because he was playing chess while his teammates were still learning checkers. The just a scorer narrative lasted exactly as long as it took for the Bulls to put a competent roster around him. The moment Pippen arrived, the moment Grant developed, the moment Jackson installed a real system, the championships came in bunches. 6 titles in 8 years. Not because Jordan changed, because everything else did. Those first 3 seasons, the 38 wins, the broken foot, the 63 points in Boston, the 3,041 points in a single season, the 200 steals and 100 blocks that nobody rewarded, the playoff exits against teams with 5 Hall of Famers, those seasons were not the preamble to greatness. They were greatness itself, trapped inside a franchise that was not yet ready to harness it. Michael Jordan was never just a scorer. He was always the whole package. The league simply was not paying close enough attention, and by the time they figured it out, it was already too late.